So last week we began a series of looking at the book of Job. We're going to try and do it in about 12, 13 weeks, but we started last week. So where are we in the book? It's a book that deals with suffering, and it's not neat and tidy. It's not, you're suffering, do this and this will happen. It's raw. It's a really raw book. We said last week, Job is wheelchair theology, not armchair theology. But it is a book that looks at whether it's God himself that we worship or God's gifts. What do we treasure most, the gift of God or the gifts that he gives us? Is God really worthy of our worship and our trust, even if we lose everything except his promises? It's horrible to think about, but I think this is where we're supposed. This is a pinch of the book of Job. If God allowed one or two or all of your kids to die, would you cling to him or would you blame him and would you walk away? One of the key verses to understanding what's going on in Job is chapter 1, verse 9, where Satan says to the Lord, "Does Job fear God for nothing?" Why is it that Job worships? Why is Job a Christian? And Satan suggests the only reason that Job follows God is because God's put a hedge around him to protect him. He's got a lovely life, he's got a lovely family, he's got loads of money, he's got good health. And Satan says that's why he worships you, because he's well off. And the greatest surprise in the first chapter of Job is that the Lord says to Satan, okay, have a go at him. Just don't touch him, but you can touch everything else. And he gives Satan permission to harm everything that Job has, but not touch Job's body. Will Job trust in God? Will we trust in God when our world falls apart? That's a wheelchair question, isn't it? The passage that we're in this morning is devastating. Two things happen to Job. Firstly, he loses everything that he has. And secondly, he loses everything that he is. He loses all his possessions, and the only thing he's got left is his health, and then he loses that. And the question for Job is, will Job still worship God? Will he trust God when he's got nothing? I'm going to look at these things under two headings. Firstly, could we worship God when our world falls apart? Could we worship God when our world falls apart? We see it verse 13 to 22. Friday marked the 19th anniversary of the attack on the Twin Towers, didn't it? And we were talking about it in our house. It was sickening. It was shocking, wasn't it, when you witnessed that? Perhaps it's the most shocking thing I've witnessed or lived through in my life was the attack on the Twin Towers. It shook society, didn't it? Put your hand up if you remember where you were at the moment. Most of us. I was sat in my office at Lloyd's Bank, and word filtered through, there's a plane hit the Twin Towers. And we all thought, wow, that's something. And then we went upstairs, and I remember watching it on the TV up there, and I couldn't quite get my head around what I was seeing. It was just devastation. There were people jumping out of 80th floor windows, and you were seeing it on TV. And then the second plane hit. And even as an armchair observer, it was one of those things, wasn't it, that I have never known something like this. But imagine being in the thick of it. It's one thing, isn't it, seeing on TV a plane flying into a building. It's another thing being in the building. Imagine some of the families. There were thousands of people. Imagine thousands, this had happened in thousands of homes that morning, that had got up in the morning, that have had breakfast together as a family probably. Kissed the wife goodbye. Kissed the kids goodbye. Said, when we get back tonight, what we're going to do, we're going to have a takeaway, or we're going to go out for some dinner. We're going to go to the cinema, or we're going to go bowling. What we're going to do? And they go off to work, and the next thing is, you turn on the TV and you see a plane crashing into a building, and you know that they're dead. And that story played out hundreds of times on that day. And there are days for us, aren't they? There are days for us, and there are people that we know where we get up, have a normal breakfast, say goodbye to our kids or husband or wife, and all's good in the world. Life's good. We're looking forward to our holidays. And before we get back to the house that night, tragedy's struck and life's never going to be the same again. You get or you hear that dreaded phone call. It's the worst feeling in the world, isn't it? It even makes my stomach churn just to think about it, something that I often think about and often dread. Getting that phone call that someone close to you has died or something terrible's happened. Well, that's what happens with Job. But it's even worse for Job. He loses everything in one day. Picture Job getting up in the morning. He gets up in the morning, he has his coffee and his quiet time, and he looks out on his veranda, and he can see all his land, and he can see his cattle in the distance. And in the distance then he can see his kid's house. And he prays and he says, Lord, I thank you for all that you've given me. Lord, you've blessed me and I love you. Blessed be the name of the Lord. And he starts to go about his daily business. He starts doing whatever he's got to do without a clue or a hint what's going to happen that day. And before long, you can see someone running towards him. And as he reaches Job, he's gasping. And Job says, what's up? And he says, well, the Sabaeans have raided us. They've stolen your oxen. They've stolen the donkey. They've stolen all your farming equipment. And they've killed all your workers. In fact, it's only me that's escaped. And Job's speechless. But before Job can gather his thoughts, there's another messenger running to him. And you can imagine Job, as the messenger catches his breath, Job says, yeah, I know, the Sabaeans have robbed us and they've murdered. No, the messenger says, something else. We were in the field and fire fell from heaven. It was like lightning. And all the sheep and all the shepherds, they were killed. In fact, it's only me that got away. And Job looks up and there's another messenger running towards him. And he said, what now? He said, well, the Chaldeans have raided us. They've stolen all your camels. They've killed all your staff. I'm the only one that got away. And in 10 minutes, Job's bankrupt. And yet something else happens that makes all those things, it makes us almost forget those things. As Job looks up, he can see another messenger running towards him. He thinks, what on earth's happened now? And this messenger's got horror on his face. You know, he's white as a sheet. He says, Job, it's your kids. So it's that thing, isn't it? I've got something to tell you. You need to sit down. Job, it's your kids. There was a tornado and it hit the corner of the house and it collapsed and all 10 of your kids are dead. And it's only me that survived. You can't get your head around that kind of suffering, can you? Absolute devastation. It's now the end of the day and Job's back on his veranda. And looking out over the same scene, now he can see dead bodies strewn across the land. There's no noise of animals. He can see some smoke rising up in the distance. And he can see the pile of bricks where his kids used to live. It's a horrific scene. Job's hedge, Job's protection has been taken away and Satan's done his worst. I don't know whether you can think of an example from history of greater loss than what happened to Job. It reminds us, doesn't it? Satan's cruel. If Satan could, he'd do this to all of us. Remember Satan's challenge to the Lord. If Job's protection's taken away, he will curse you. Satan must be rubbing his hands together. He must think, I've done it, finally. Job's going to curse God. I've won. What does Job do? Verse 20. Then Job arose. You can imagine it, can't you? Job slowly getting to his feet, just kind of dragging himself to his feet. And he tore his robe as a sign of mourning. And he shaved his head as a sign of mourning. And he fell to the ground because he's beaten. And he worshipped. He praised God. How can you praise God when that happens? See, worship isn't just raising your hands and singing to a catchy tune. In his distress, Job fell on his knees and he worshipped God. This is agonizing worship. This is wheelchair worship. This is worship when you don't feel like it. Worship means that you express what something's worth to you. It's worthship. How much is something worth to you? Well, when everything falls apart for Job, he gets down on his knees and says, God, you are worth something to me. It is Job. It is a broken man. And effectively it says this: Jesus, you are still my treasure. Jesus, I've lost everything, but you're still my treasure. Satan must have been spitting feathers, mustn't he? And Job says, naked I came from my mother's womb. Naked shall I return there. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. And then we read, in all this, Job did not sin, nor charge God with wrong. And we just think, wow. How we respond to suffering shows the state of our hearts. The direction we turn to when we suffer shows what our treasure is. And Job acknowledges three massive biblical truths that keep him going. Firstly, he acknowledges this: everything that we've got is a gift from God. Naked I came into the world, and naked I go out. Everything you and me have got. Think of all the things that you've got, all the people that you've got, all the possessions that you've got. Everything you've got has been loaned to you as a gift from God, and one day is going to take it back. It's all on 0% finance, if you like. Everything you've got in this world is borrowed. It's a gift. And one day is going to take it back. Your health's a gift. Your kids are a gift. Your husband or your wife's a gift. The hobbies that you enjoy are a gift. None of them are yours. And one day, God's going to take them back. Secondly, Job acknowledges, this world's not my home. The old song, wasn't they? This world is not my home. I'm just passing through. Job says, I shall return. I'll return there. Job's hope, our ultimate hope, isn't in this world. That doesn't mean that we won't, we shouldn't get distressed when we experience terrible things in this world, but this world's passing away. And so our ultimate hope isn't in this world. And so if everything in this world's taken away, if our hope isn't in this world, we've still got hope. In terms of eternity, this world doesn't measure on the scales. And thirdly, trials reveal who we are. Because Job said, the Lord has given and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be his name. In trials and in suffering, people will either move towards or away from Jesus. You'll find that in church life. You'll find that in your life. In trials and in suffering, people will either draw back from Jesus or draw towards him. Because whatever you love and care for most in this world, when suffering comes, that's the thing you turn to. Suffering shows who you are. Now all of this, everything I've got is a gift from God, this world's not my own, trials reveal who we are, these are things that are really easy to say from the armchair, aren't they? Really easy for me in some ways to say all these things from up front, but what if it happens to me? What if what happens to Job, even some of what happens to Job, happens to me? Will I still be saying the same things? That's the challenge, that's the pinch point of this passage. Will we say it when it happens to us? When life crushes us, will we get on our knees and affirm that Jesus is my treasure and God's still good? It's normal and it's natural and it's okay for us to have an aversion to suffer. We don't want to suffer. We don't want to be martyrs. Nobody wants to be a martyr. But I think this is one of the biggest problems we got in the church and in the pulpit and in Christianity, is that our happiness is more important than God's glory. Yes, we don't want to suffer, but our happiness becomes more important than God's glory. That's ultimately why we sacrifice a little, isn't it? That's why we get so put out by little inconveniences. I'm not having a go, but ultimately all the restrictions for Corona, they're little inconveniences. And yet we can skip a worship meeting because I'm not going there if I've got to wear a mask. And here's Job, whose kids have just died, and he's worshipping. The biggest problem, or one of the biggest problems that we have today, myself included, is that our happiness is more important than God's glory. And that's why we're prepared to suffer so little. That's why little inconvenience has put us out so much. Everything fell apart for Job, and he still worshipped. It's agonizing worship, but I think it's the most beautiful Christ-like worship we have perhaps in the Bible. Blessed be your name when the road's marked with suffering. Though there's pain in the offering, blessed be your name. It's easy to sing it, but what about when it happens to us? We want to be like Jesus, don't we? We want to be, as a Christian, you want to be like Jesus. You are never, ever more like Jesus on this earth than when you suffer unjustly and still worship the Father. You will never be more like Jesus than when you suffer unfairly and still worship God. That when you suffer terribly and unfairly and you still say to your Father in heaven, into your hands I commit my spirit. It's the most Christ-like thing you'll ever do in this world is worship God when life batters you. I know someone, and most of you do too, and in one day her world fell apart. Emotional, financial, marital, it all went in a day. I remember feeling broken for her. And in agony, she didn't hit the bottle. She didn't run away, even though she probably wanted to. She gathered her kids. She got on her knees. And she read Romans 8. I do not consider the sufferings of this present time to be worthy to compare to the glory that's to come. All things work together for good for those that love him. If God is for us, who can be against us? She read that on her knees when everything had been taken away. And that's worship. Lord, my life's fallen apart. Lord, you're still my treasure. You're still worthy of my praise. That is the most Christ-like worship we'll ever do. Who are the proper fans? The proper fans are the ones that turn up every week and keep singing when the team's getting battered. Job loses everything that he has. But he doesn't, because he still has Jesus. And through gritted teeth and tears, he worships. How we respond to agonizing trials show who we are. I know it's horrible and it's easy to say, but it talks in Proverbs, doesn't it, about he who faints in the day of adversity, his faith is small. We must worship even when our world falls apart. But it doesn't end there. The second question is this. Job's world's fallen apart, but could we trust God if our health falls apart? You could say, well, I've lost everything, but you've still got your health. You hear that, don't you? This has happened to me, that's happened to me. Yeah, but you've still got your health, as long as you've got your health. Well, Job's lost all that he has, now he loses all that he is. Up until now, the Lord had said to Satan, okay, you can touch Job's possessions, but not his body. You leave his body alone. And now as we come to chapter 2, we're back in heaven, and Satan's again summoned before God, and God's delighted with Job's integrity, and Satan's isn't satisfied, he's insatiable. I've only been allowed to touch what belongs to Job, he says, but he's still got his health. Let me have his health, and then he'll curse you. And again, it's a shock, isn't it? But the Lord allows it. One of the biggest questions, why does the Lord allow it? But say, he says you can do that, but don't kill him. Why doesn't the Lord say, enough now, Satan, Job's proved himself, stop? Because God's glory really is more important than our suffering. It's not that God doesn't care about our suffering, but him being glorified is more important than our suffering. And so off Satan goes, and to this man who's broken with grief, now Satan devastates his health. Here's our lady whose husband died in the Twin Towers, and the next day she finds out she owes 100 grand on the mortgage, and she finds out she's got no life insurance, and she finds out that one of the kids in racing home from school has been hit by a car and killed. And you think tragedy upon tragedy upon tragedy. Well, that's Job, but worse. We're told in verse 7 that Satan strikes Job with painful boils from the sole of his foot to the top of his head. You ever had a boil? We don't know, is it leprosy? His whole body just becomes a mass of infection. Imagine looking at him. Think, what has this bloke done wrong? In fact, that's what his friends are thinking later on. What's this bloke done wrong for this to happen? Throughout the book, Job's described as being covered with boils, having peeling skin, having a fever, having insomnia, having putrefying breath, having rotting feet, and being depressed. Every bit of vitality is squeezed from him. What kind of patient are you? I'm a miserable patient when I'm poorly. I've had a bad shoulder recently. I've been sleeping about 5 hours a night. I've been grumpy as can be. And here's Job, and he has his life ripped apart. And he's still mourning for his kids. And now his health gets battered. And he's in agony with no relief. We read that it's so bad, the itching's so bad, that he gets a jagged piece of pottery and he's just scraping the skin from his arms just to try and get a bit of relief. But he's in agony. You want to weep for the bloke, don't you? He's sat there and he's sat on a pile of ashes. Probably, the ashes from all that's been broken and bust. He's sat on a pile of ashes. There can't be a worse picture, can there? Everything about him is now broken. He's lost everything. His health's gone, and he's sat on a pile of ashes. Jesus talks about a place called Gehenna. Gehenna was this smouldering rubbish dump, a pile of ashes outside Jerusalem where all the rubbish was burnt. And Jesus used it as a picture of hell. Well, Job's in his Gehenna. Job is as close as a Christian can get to hell. Everything's been squeezed from him and he's sat on ashes. And you think, surely now, nobody can survive this. Surely Job's going to crack. And just to add insult to injury, his wife turns up. We must understand it's not just Job that's suffered. Mrs. Job has suffered. She's lost her kids. She's lost her lifestyle. She's still got her health, but she's lost everything else. But in her suffering, in Job's suffering, Job turns towards the Lord. But in Mrs. Job's suffering, she turns away from him. She turns up to Job and says, do you still hold your integrity? Curse God and die. Maybe she wants relief for Job. She wants him to curse God so God will kill him. But in her suffering, she turns away. She's hurting, but remember what we said earlier. How we respond to suffering shows the state of our hearts. The direction we run in suffering shows where our heart's directed towards. It was Satan's aim to get Job to curse God, and now he uses Job's wife. She wants him to curse God so that God will put him out of his misery. When you read that Satan was allowed to take everything from Job, you think, well, why did he leave Job's wife? Well, I think the answer is she was more useful to Satan alive than dead. Job's in a mess emotionally, physically, financially, mentally, but not spiritually. And as Job's wife encourages him to curse God, again he replies with an amazing reply. Verse 10, you speak as one of the foolish women speaks. Shall we indeed accept good from God and not accept adversity? And in all this, Job did not sin with his lips. Job looks like a mess. He's a giant. He's an oak. Often when we see people and that we see them battered and broken and struggling, we think, oh, what a pitiful person. Job was an oak. Now, it doesn't say Job didn't sin at all. It doesn't say he didn't sin in his heart, because Job wasn't perfect. But he didn't sin with his lips. Through scabby, peeling, sore lips, blistered lips, Job praises God who has allowed everything to be taken from him. Why? Because he's worthy. Why can Job accept what's happened to him? How can Job trust God with the state that he's in? How could Job get on his knees and worship when his life's fallen apart? Have you thought about how could Job do that? Well, look back with me to verse 1 of chapter 1. This is how the book starts. How could Job survive in all this suffering? Job was a man who feared God and shunned evil. Why could Job's faith stand up when Job couldn't even stand up? Because he's prepared. The strength, this is what we've got to understand, the strength that Job had to stand didn't come upon him in a moment when he was struck. There was no sudden rush of strength. In fact, you remember the story I told you last week about that couple whose kids died in the car? One of their testimonies afterwards was that he said the Lord had been preparing us for this for years and he'd been giving us the strength for this for years. All of Job's integrity, all of Job's trust in God, all of Job's worship, all of his good godly habits are coming before the Lord. That's what prepared him for this day. We can say, yeah, God sustained Job by his grace, but Job's strength came from years of walking with God. How did David avoid sin when he did avoid sin? He said, I've avoided sin because I've hidden your word in my heart. Someone said, faith is not an elastic band. Faith isn't an elastic band that can stretch. It's a muscle that's got to be trained. How do we train faith so that we can worship in trouble? Well, we spend time in God's word regularly. Maybe we learn catechisms. We spend time in prayer regularly, building our muscles. We spend time with God's people regularly. We turn away from what we know to be evil regularly. And as we do that, we build our faith muscles. And when trouble comes, we'll stand. Daniel 11, verse 32. The people who know their God shall be strong. Isaiah 40, verse 31. Those who wait on the Lord will renew their strength. Did God's grace sustain Job? Absolutely. But how did God's grace work with Job through years of Job exercising his faith? I recognize there's always exceptions to the rule, but you and me, we will only respond to trials the same way we respond to everyday troubles. What do we take from all this? How should we read Job today? You know, this book's thousands of years old, so how should we read it today? Well, Satan hasn't changed. Peter describes Satan. He's still a roaring lion. He's still going around seeking who he might devour. He's still going to and fro on the earth looking for victims. Jesus said to Peter, Peter, Satan desires you to sift you, but I've protected you. So today, can what happened to Job happen to you or me? Can what happened to Job happen to me? Can I lose everything? Can Satan do things to me like he did with Job? Well, while Satan hasn't changed, something has changed. The answer is yes and no. Yes, me and you can still suffer, even to the degree of Job. But something's changed. Satan doesn't have the authority he had then. Satan's power is diminished. Satan's now on a leash. He's still dangerous, but he's been bound. John will tell you about that on Tuesday in Revelation 20 if you're at the prayer meeting. In the Old Testament, Satan had some sort of access into God's presence. Heaven wasn't his home, but he had access into God's presence. That's certainly what happened in Job 1 and 2. In Zechariah 3 it talks about it. Satan was still allowed to come in and out of God's presence in the Old Testament. But something happens that changes all that. When Jesus rises from the dead after his crucifixion, Satan's kicked out of heaven, never to have access again. I used to think, and it is true, Satan was kicked out of heaven when he rebelled against God in the beginning. But he still had access. He could still go in and out and report to God. I've been reading Revelation 12 this week. Revelation 12 tells us it's through the blood of the Lamb that Satan was cast out of heaven. All the commentaries that I read said this is talking about Jesus' death and resurrection. Why can't Satan do to us like he did to Job? Because Satan no longer has access into God's presence like he did once. Why? Because of what Jesus did on the cross. Colossians 2:15 says there's been a massive change because of Jesus' victory on the cross, he disarmed Satan. In John 12, Jesus declares, when I'm lifted up, the ruler of this world will be cast out. Satan can still tempt you and me, but he can't do it before God. Satan is not allowed anymore into God's presence to accuse you and me. He can still accuse you and me, but not before God. His power's been diminished. All because of what Jesus did on the cross. Revelation 12 says, now salvation and strength in the kingdom of our God and the power of his Christ have come. For the accuser of our brethren, who's accused them before our God day and night, he has been cast down through the blood of the Lamb. Satan cannot go to God about you and me anymore. He can come to you and me about you and me. He can't go to God anymore. Why? Because Jesus has suffered for us. That's why Jesus is worthy of our praise. Because Jesus didn't sin with his lips or with his heart. Jesus emptied himself. He gave up all the things that Job had taken away from him. Jesus gave up gladly. He gave up his home. He gave up his relationship with his Father. He took Satan's worst. He suffered. He was beaten. He tasted death for us. He dragged a cross up a hill so they could murder him. Why? So that he could sympathize with us in our suffering. And secondly, so that Satan can never come before God and accuse God's people ever again. It's great that as we look at the book of Job, we see it as a call, don't we? Job is a call to practice faith that will see us through trials. But if we don't see Jesus in Job, then we miss out. We see Jesus standing before us and Satan. Could we worship God when our life and our health falls apart? Well, because of Jesus, we can say yes. But it's not neat. Job continued to suffer, and we suffer. But Satan won't have the last laugh. Satan's days of being allowed into God's presence are over. They're gone. Jesus has seen to that. He can accuse us still, but God won't listen. And we can only face these things if our faith's fixed on Jesus. And the question is it? Have you come to Jesus? Have you considered my servant Jesus? The Father says to us. That there's none like him on earth, a blameless and upright man. Have you considered my servant Jesus, a man who Satan was let loose on, and the Father in control allowed Satan to go one further than Job and actually kill him? And as Satan does his worst and all the powers of darkness assault Jesus, we praise God that we can say, in all of this, Jesus did not sin or charge God with wrong. And we can say, blessed be the name of the Lord. We're going to sing as we close, Rock of Ages, cleft for me, let me hide myself in thee.